Welcome to the program of BALAR. The aim of this program is to present the STAND Design and BAIL integrated learning model to teachers based on the experience gathered during its implementation in France. This corresponds to the fifth lesson entitled Artwork Production. It provides some activities to establish the discourse that will support artwork in different settings by being prepared to express their work to outsiders. In the fifth lesson, it is important to establish the discourse to support artworks in different settings. This is by prepare to express participants' works to outsiders. This is why concept art seems to be pertinent for the development of art as a resistance, which can be at the core of this workshop based on the PALAR approach for Roma inclusion through positive narrative. Art as a resistance works on particular traumatic memories, but the goal is to create an effective form of public protest. Therefore, in this approach, the creation of symbol languages through the artwork is crucial to impact society. Nevertheless, aesthetic achievements will never undermine the objective of providing an space for an exchange of ideas. Even though the objective of a SBAIL workshop in Ivry-sur-Seine is linked to providing a positive image of the Roma community in Ivry-sur-Seine, during the workshop, there has been reflections linked to situations in which participants were subject to the exclusion, and this is why we link the work done with art as a tool of protest, but by providing a positive discourse. Art as a tool of protest is widely accepted since art allows remembering in a public forum, and therefore it is effective to bring discussion and protest. It is usually created to portray alternative perspectives and narratives in an imbalanced situation that is supported usually by mainstream media. As in the case of discrimination of Roma community, it can be possible to find that mainstream media, when generalizing and covering negative aspects, exacerbate discrimination. Also, when online tools cannot control the content of discriminative publications that goes viral. Thus, in this case, art as a resistance plays an important role. First, it brings people together to tell stories that need to be told, to send a positive image of their culture and their community. Second, it encourages further action that comes from empowerment to continue with the process of integration. SBAIL artwork in Ivry-sur-Seine have taken different forms of expression that advocates for social and political change, as they are developed by the reality of their particular community in the society of Ivry-sur-Seine. In social inclusion, this is why we're looking from the arts, because these objectives represents a form of expression done by people, the participants, that usually do not have a voice in society. Moreover, the SBAIL artwork can be categorized as a community art since the process was developed from the perspective of community, with its participation and for its benefit. It emerged to face inequalities or needs, and it contains intentional empowerment. The artwork will be placed where the audience can put themselves in someone else's shoes, but more importantly, the audience can stay in their own shoes and design solutions based on the Roma community's living experience. Erase the line between audience and observers and Roma community as the creator. Engage them with a question and put them at the center of the story. In this way, you will create a first-hand experience of the narrative, where the audience can take part and interact with the artwork or respond to it by creating one themselves. The key is to give hope to the others who can relate to their experience and ignite the desire that the audience actually has that experience in real life and contribution to the change. In order to respond to the question, how to conduct a speech for a narrative, please note that discourse analysis is a qualitative and interpretative method of analyzing text, in contrast to more systematic methods such as content analysis. You make interpretations based both on the details of the materials itself and on contextual knowledge. The presented methodology is just an example. You can use some other methodologies that you already know. Note that in addition to understanding the real-life context of a speech, You can also conduct a literature review on the topic and build a theoretical framework to guide your learners' analysis. For example, if the main subject is professional path or jobs of Romani, you can also investigate these jobs in other cultures to see if they have the same evolution. This is in order to contrast and create a general overview embracing European culture. It is important to also provide a level of discourse adapted to the learning process of the participants. We cannot create a literature review or a comparative analysis of European countries if the participants have difficulties such as illiteracy. So the process of creating our discourse should be adapted to their skills to not cause frustrations or inhibitions. Discourse is one of the main parts of this workshop as it is linked to the positive narrative. Learners will make interpretations based on both the details of the material used and the final prototype itself and the contextual knowledge created during the session. These are different approaches that you can use to perform speech narrative construction, but exercise 4 outlines the basic steps trainers must follow. Through the different stages of this workshop, the methodology focused on providing a positive narrative of Romani culture to fight discrimination, so learners have created a common basis of the resources and the discursive behind the artwork developed. However, it is important to provide a space to focalize on the discursive of the artwork at the end to set basis of the work and to empower participants to be able to share the narrative in the best way possible. So at this point, we can talk about the expected process. The expected process is, it is important to remember that, it is better if the construction of the narrative is developed during the other exercises. However, it is important to have a final phase to review and set the common understanding of what our artwork represents and intends to communicate. First of all, learners have to choose the central main question that will deploy all the narrative discourse. Then the central question must be limited to a specific context or subject. After that, learners search for the information that answers the question. Then learners write the narrative discourse, and finally learners evaluate if the discourse is effective to transmit the meaning of the artwork with the positive narrative. In order to help the process of communication, we suggest this final activity. Now, some guidelines in terms of the SBAIL workshop needs to be considered based on the learning that we got from the Ivry-sur-Seine workshop. And we need to start from with the principle that we are more emotional than rational beings. And even though all emotions, as I have already explained so in several occasions, are all absolutely all generated in the brain, we must be aware that the fact of being affected, being an artistic object with a story behind it, will always motivate us to learn more about that object and its conceptual proposition. It's part of the persuasion of telling a story. We are made of stories, moments, and experience. Watch out, let's not confuse the objective. I make a point to remember that the objective of the exhibition is not to sell the art object, that people recognize the value of the work of the art for its aesthetic is not the end. For this SBAIL workshop, it is to raise awareness about the process of the Romani community in its integration in France. If the viewer leaves this exhibition with this perspective bingo, we have achieved the objective of the workshop. Based on that, keep attention to the following points that must contain your narrative. Motivation. The story should motivate. Motivation and persuasion. In storytelling, it is important to understand that without motivation, there is no emotion. In other words, when we tell a story, in whatever format, it is essential to arouse emotions. If there is no emotion, there is no reaction from users, and the story does not motivate, leading to the message becoming a failure. Emotions. The story should generate emotions. We have already said that we are more emotional than rational beings. So starting from this base, the story must excite and sensitize the user. This will be the result of an emotional reaction where the user will show us that in one way or another he has felt, identified, or committed. That will be an intangible fact, obviously, since we will not be able to find out to what extent, how excited he has been and how he has reacted. But if he does, rest assured that we will no longer look at the situation with indifference. When we are moved by a message, it is because at some point in history, there was a word, image, sound, or phrase that remind us of something from some point in our lives, transferring it to the personal, to our own experience. Finally, be captive. The story must captivate, hook, and arouse curiosity from the beginning. In a digital age where infoxication or excess of information is the order of the day, where we receive an average of 5,000 hits a day, and where our brain filters what interests us most from everything it receives, that is, it keeps what meets or needs. If it doesn't engage the user from the beginning, rest assured that it will do it later. We live in the age of immediacy, where nobody has time for anything and we want everything quickly and without delay. It is logical to think then that all those stories that do not engage from the beginning will die in the middle in an attempt to captive the story. Also, it is important to remember that we need to have that the exhibition needs to be easy to remember. The more elaborated a story is, the more complicated we make it to remember. Remember that I commented that we receive an average of 5,000 daily hits of information. So the simpler the story, the easier to remember, and this will be better. If it's not necessary to create stories with many elements, but yes, with enough force and emotion impact to make them stand out. If the narrative leaves its mark, it can be transmitted to many more people. Thank you.